Very nice.
Morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me this time. I remembered to turn on the microphone, unlike last week. So thanks for joining us. Today we have Dave Wildfong. He's here to talk about interviewing, some tips, techniques, some ways you can go about practicing and all of that great stuff that's going to be very important to you coming up as you move forward with your degree and then looking for some of those first-time jobs. So I'm going to pass it over to him. If you have questions or anything, of course, you can type it in the chat box. Go ahead and turn off your microphones, and he may ask you some questions. So please feel free to, chime in. And then when he's done, I'll have him turn it back over to me, and we'll go over your few more assignments that you have. So enjoy.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Dave Wolfong. I work here at WCC in our Career Services Department. I'm going to, now that you've seen me, I'm going to kill the webcam. There we go. So what we're going to be talking about this morning is basically how to be an interview pro. And I know a lot of people have gone on interviews, so some of you in the audience may know the process for interviewing, but there's always room for improvement. Interviewing is hard for a lot of people, even those of us who have gone through it multiple times. So it is something that everybody can brush up and practice a little bit on. So what we're going to be talking about this morning are some very, very simple things, techniques and strategies that you can incorporate into your own job searching for your own career pursuits, and doing some prep work in terms of getting ready so you can be very successful once you get into the interview. So yeah, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you in a very short period of time that we have together. If anyone does have any questions, yeah, please feel free to pop them into the chat box there, and we'll go ahead and get started. So typically, and again, typically, the interview is the second phase of the hiring process. The first phase is submission of a resume or an application to a job posting that you're interested in getting hired on for. So an interview is typically post submission of a resume or an application. So it's kind of that second phase. And really what it's designed to do, its purpose, kind of has a couple of different purposes. The first is to again, as I have there on the first bullet, is kind of selling yourself, and by that I mean your backgrounds, your experience, your educations, you basically, to the prospective employer. They know a little bit about you from the resume or the application that you've submitted, and there was something about you on that resume or in that application that they wanted to find out more about. Okay, employers do not interview everybody who submits a resume. Usually it's about 10% of the resume or applicants and those who have submitted an application get an interview. So it's usually 4 or 5 people get an interview. And so there was something about you on a resume or on that application that kind of connected with them due to your experiences or your education or your skills that you can provide. So they want to find out more about you, so they're going to bring you into the interview. This is, as I had there in a second bullet, it's the opportunity for you to, again, show to the employer just how qualified an applicant you are. And going into much more detail about you and your background and your experiences, your education, what have you, then can be put on a couple of sheets of paper on your resume. So this is your time to capitalize on that interest that they have for bringing you in for the interview. Now, there is another key important piece of an interview that you may not be aware of. But this is also an opportunity for you to learn more about the employer. Now, we're going to talk about here in a few moments researching an employer that you have an interview for. But it isn't really until you get into the interview site or on the interview site that you learn more about the employer. You get a kind of a peek behind the curtain. let's say you're trying to get a job in the IT industry, and you get called into a company, and they bring you into the interview, and as you meet and greet people and walk through the interview site, you see everything is well organized. The systems and the hardware and the software that people are using are very up to date, and everyone seems to be, really working together in a collaborative environment. People seem nice and friendly. You're like, oh, I can see myself working in this type of environment. It's sort of those non-tangible things that you'll pick up on. But maybe the opposite could be true. Maybe you get an interview and you come into an organization or a company and things seem very haphazard and kind of disorganized. And maybe, again, if it's an IT situation where maybe the systems seem to be out of date, or the hardware seems to be, again, out of date. And maybe it gives you a pause about whether or not this is a good fit for you. So again, you're getting a peek behind the curtain about the employer when you go on these interviews. So it's a two-way street. They're learning about you as you are learning about them. So there are 3, and these are very broad steps for a successful interview, and we're going to be covering these today. Oops, I went backwards. There we go. And we're going to be kind of talking about each of these in turn. One, and I just mentioned this a moment ago, is researching the employer and industry. So doing a little bit of homework on the employer, so you are that much more of a quote-unquote expert of them when you get into the interview session. Second is, taking a look at that job description and making sure that you have the right skills, experience, and interests that fit the job, and then being able to talk about your skills or your education in great detail. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. And then, of course, the different types of interviews that you might face. There are several different interview formats that you may come in contact with as you're interviewing. I want to talk a little bit about them and the differences between each. And also some of those typical types of interview questions that you may want to practice for as you get ready for your interview. So to begin with, we're going to start with researching the employer. So a very common question when it comes to interviews is the interviewers might ask you, what do you know about us? So what do you know about my company? Or what do you know about my business? Or what do you know about my organization? It's a very common question. And employers ask this to see just how interested you are in working for them. And it looks really bad if they ask you this question and you aren't able to give them any information about them, because what it then feels like is that you just applied to this position or applied to this company because they were hiring, nothing else. And so that's why it's always important, whether or not they ask this question or not, but know the employer, do some research. And it's incredibly easy to do this nowadays. Go to their website. You just go to their homepage, take a look at an About Us or history page on the website to find out a little bit more about the employer. Now, on the screen here, I have several different areas that you can do some research on. And so it's a good chance that you'll probably be asked this question. So you want to be, I said expert earlier, and I should put that in quotes, but you should know 4 or 5 things about the company or the business or the organization that you're interviewing with in case they ask this question. So let's say you were trying to get a job here at Washtenaw Community College, and you could say, if someone here, if you got an interview and asked you, well, what do you know about Washtenaw Community College? You could say, well, I know that the college was established in 1968. And that typically there are 12,500 students every semester, and there are over 150 associate's degrees, advanced certificates, certificate programs at the college, blah, 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 blah. So those are the kinds of things that employers like to hear. So a little bit of a background history. They don't want 25 minutes about them. No, just kind of keep it to 4 or 5 things that that you researched. In this way, it shows that you did a little bit of research, and it takes seconds to find out this information. You go to Google, type in the company's name, and you're on their website, find their history page or their history or About Us site on their main web page, and glean that information from there. and it looks that much worse for you because it takes so little time to find this information. If they ask you, what do you know about us? And you say, well, I don't really know anything about you, or you try to make it up on the spot. And over the years, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, I've seen all kinds of people try to bluff their way through this question when they didn't do the research. But it just kind of is two strikes against you that if you don't do the research for the employer. So kind of keep that in mind. That you can do some research, and it's very easy nowadays. Just go to the company's history or about us page. All right, so that's the first step. Second, we're going to take a look at your background, your experiences, your skills, education, work history, and how they relate to the position and how to talk about them. So before any interview, you want to be prepared. You never want to go into an interview cold. And what I mean by that is just kind of go in, don't do any prep work, and wing it basically. And some people might be able to do that, but for the most job seekers, you want to do some prep work. This reduces anxiety as well, and that's one of the big things that can be a barrier to your success during an interview is nervousness or anxiety. Anxiety causes kind of your brain to lock up, and so it doesn't allow you to pull details about your experience, and it may look like you don't really know yourself. And I always use the kind of corny cliche of you all are the foremost experts on yourselves. No one else is going to ever know you as well as you know yourself. So you're an expert, and you should be able to talk about yourself in detail when you get asked a question. So anxiety sometimes counteracts that. It can really cause the gears in your brain to lock up, and it just doesn't look good if you're not able to recall information about yourself. So you need to be able to know yourself, as I have, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on these different areas. Be able to talk about at length your education. Be able to talk at length about your work experience and skill sets that you provide. I already mentioned this a moment ago, but before the interview, you're going to do some research into the employer as well, and then practicing the common interview questions. So let's say, so today is Tuesday. Let's say right now at 11:40-ish, you get a call from an employer that you had submitted a resume or an application to, and they want to set up an interview with you for a position as a nurse. Maybe you're trying to get a job in healthcare, so you've gone through our nursing program here at WCC, so you're kind of job hunting for a nursing position. And let's say it's with St. Joe's Hospital across the street. You got an interview there, all right? So they want to set up the interview, a hypothetical interview for, let's say, Friday morning at 9 a.m. So you've got a few days to kind of practice, and you're really excited because you've been trying to get a job for the last couple of months, and you really haven't got any interviews, but something connected with your resume in St. Joe's, and they want to bring you in for an interview. So it's great. You've got a couple of days, but you've got, maybe you're currently working as a nursing assistant over the next couple of days, so you've got your shifts to attend to. Maybe you have family and family responsibilities. So you may not have a lot of time over the next couple of days to get prepared, but any time that you can carve out in your busy schedules, you need to concentrate on getting prepped for the interview on Friday morning. So what questions they might ask you about your education, you need to be the expert about. So know what what your degree is in. And that may sound silly, but I'll ask some students, I'm like, well, what degree are you going for here at Washtenaw Community College? Well, I'm getting a bachelor's degree in business. I'm like, well, no, we don't give bachelor degrees here at Washtenaw Community College. Or they'll say, something like that, which may be inaccurate. So you, again, you're the foremost expert on yourself. So know what degree or certificate that you're going for. Do you have any special certifications or licensures? If you're going to be a nurse, you had to get your state licensure, so be able to talk about that. This is a very common question, as I have on there, what your favorite or least favorite classes were think about the classes that you've taken here at Washtenaw well, in this case, the nursing program. What were your favorite? Which were your least favorite? And be able to talk about that. It's a very common interview question you might get asked. You know, what type of academic achievements? Were you on the dean's list here at Washtenaw 4 semesters? They may or may not ask for a list of your or a transcript from you, so a list of the classes that you completed here. More and more, this is something that's becoming very common in terms of the application bundle. So they may ask for a cover letter, resume, references, and copies of your transcripts. So they may have some information about your educational history. So be able to talk about that, because they may say, oh, I see that you took microbiology. How did that class go for you? They may make it very specific about you because they have that transcript. So be prepared to talk at length about your educational history. Were you involved in any clubs? Were you in Phi Theta Kappa? Did you receive any specialized awards or any types of activities you were involved in? So in great detail, know your educational experiences, not just here at Washtenaw. Let's say you eventually transfer to Eastern, start taking classes at Eastern or U of M or Wayne State or Oakland University. Any educational institution that you've attended and got a degree from, you might get asked questions about. So know your educational background. Same goes for your work experience or employment experience. Know your jobs, know them inside and out, and be able to talk about them in very detailed pieces of information. A common question I get from people who are going into interviews is, well, how long should my responses be? You have on the screen, Dave, they'll be very detailed, but how detailed should I be? Well, that's a hard answer, or a hard question to answer. How long should your answers be? Typically, what we suggest is you should aim for an answer or response that is between 2 and 3 minutes long, and that's being somewhat concise. It may seem like a long time, but you'd be surprised how quickly that time goes. So you want to get to the point. Employers like conciseness. They like being very detailed, but get to the point, because sometimes in interviews, especially if someone's very nervous, they can get to rambling, and they kind of start to go, they lose their train of thought, they go down a rabbit hole, and the next thing you know, they forgot where they were going. So being concise and getting to the point, answering the question with a good level of detail, like 2 to 3 minutes is kind of a good window to shoot for. Some people will go kind of the other end of the spectrum and be very quick in answering interview questions. Again, some of this could be nervousness, some of it could be lack of preparedness, but if you don't give them enough detail about you, it makes it that much more difficult on whether or not to determine if you're a good hire candidate. So kind of work when you're practicing, aim for like a 2-minute response, and you'd be surprised how quickly that goes, okay? Now, as you take a look at your employment experience, know your jobs that you've had, where you worked, when you worked at these places, know your title. A lot of people I work with, they'll have worked at some place for a long time and don't know their exact title, but know that type of information, know your responsibilities, be able to talk about your daily or day-to-day activities on the job in very detail, especially if it relates to the kind of position you're interviewing for now. Employers love applicants and love hiring candidates who have had previous relevant or related experience. It makes you that much more qualified. So if you, in our scenario, if you were a nurse and you're a CNA, a nursing assistant right now, you want to talk in detail about your nursing assistant responsibilities that you have over at Glacier Hills. So know your responsibilities, know your day-to-day activities on the job. And especially if it's related to the job you're trying to get currently. Any type of accomplishments that you've had on the job, maybe you were Employee of the Month 6 months in a row in 2017. Maybe let's say you were a salesperson and you sold the most product or the most widgets or whatever in the 4th quarter of 2016. Any type of accomplishments or recognitions that you've received on the job, employers love to hear that from you. So they may ask you, tell me, I see on your resume that you've worked at Glacier Hills for the last 2 years. Tell me about your experiences there. That may be a question they ask you. And so be able to talk about your experiences, your responsibilities, and those accomplishments, any types of accomplishments or recognitions that you're particularly proud of, be able to share those with the employer. Now, this last bullet is incredibly important. Even, well, in life, you'll have good bosses, you'll have mediocre bosses, and you'll have poor bosses. We've all had that. But even if you had a past job, past work experience where it wasn't that great, always be positive about this experience. Don't ever talk bad about a past supervisor or past work experience. It looks unprofessional of you to do that. Plus, you have to think of industries out there as small communities where everybody seems to know everybody. So if you talk bad about your experience at a past employer, maybe one of the interviewers knows that employer, and so it just looks unprofessional for you to talk bad about a past employment experience. So always be positive, even if it wasn't the greatest experience you've ever had. All right, now skills is another area you might get asked about. An employer may come right out and say, tell me 5 skills that you currently possess that you think will be beneficial for you in this position or help you be successful in this position. So know about the types of things that you can do. Now, skills, there's a wide range of them out there. There's one type of skill set that are like what we call technical or industry-based skills. An example I have here is if you were trying to get a job as a dental assistant, but maybe you're maybe trying to get work as a nurse, maybe you're trying to get work as a welder, maybe you're trying to get work as an accountant. There are all skills that are very specific to that industry or that type of job, and you need to be able to talk in detail about your skills that maybe you're learning here at Washington Community College in the classes that you're taking, or maybe that you learned in past work experience as well. So kind of think about those things that are dependent upon your industry, that you're learning in classes that you had in past experiences, and be able to talk about those skills in great detail. Now, there are also another type of skill set, commonly called soft skills, that employers love to see represented in hiring candidates as well. So these are things like, as I have on the screen, communication abilities, the ability to work in a fast-paced, team-oriented environment. Dependability, believe it or not, one of the biggest skills we hear from employers right now is people showing up on time for their shifts. That's one of those things that all employers seem to look for, which sounds silly, but it's just kind of the thing that employers are having difficulty in getting their potential hiring candidates showing up on time. And so, having a positive attitude, especially certain fields, like healthcare, social work, those types of jobs, you must come to work, or education, even primary, secondary education, come to work with a positive attitude, come to work with a smile on your face. So be able to talk about those particular soft skills that you feel you're strong at. I'll tell you right now, the top 3 soft skills that employers typically look for: someone who can work in a team-oriented environment, someone who has strong communication abilities, and then that dependability factor. That's you're highly reliable and dependable. So those are the top 3 according to the research that we do and looking up in the literature that all employers look for. And you'll see these included directly in a job posting. It'll say, must be able to work in a fast-paced, multiculturally diverse, team-oriented environment. You'll see that embedded right in a job posting or employment opportunity. So, be very mindful of that. Pay close attention to that job posting, that employment opportunity that you applied to. Keep, if you didn't, maybe print it out and read through it very carefully, because that job posting is exactly who they're looking for. That is their perfect candidate. And so as you read through it, they're going to be asking questions based off of that job posting. And so use that as a roadmap, but also, even taking a step back, when you're creating your resume, follow that job posting like a roadmap, because again, that's who they're looking for. But also in the interview, maybe even taking the job posting with you, and use it as kind of a template to follow along with as you're prepping over the next couple of days in our hypothetical situation here, to get that much more prepared for the interview. So be able to talk about your employment experience, be able to talk about your educational experience and the skills that you possess that the employer is going to want to incorporate into their team by hiring you. You are the foremost expert on yourselves, and so be able to talk to them in great detail. When it comes to knowing ourselves, it sounds simple that we all kind of, know ourselves, but that's not always the case. I kind of use the imagery where our brains are like a pond that's out in the woods in the forest someplace, and it's kind of just this kind of static, nobody ever goes to this pond. So our brains, most of there's stuff kind of floating on the top like leaves and things like that. That's our day-to-day kind of information, things that aren't really deep in detail. But down underneath, floating, that's probably on the bottom of the pond now, is all kind of the important stuff that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. But if you've ever been in a pond or a lake, and if it's shallow and you kind of churn it up, things will float to the surface. And that's what you're doing in being prepared. You're pulling that information that you don't think about daily up to the surface so you can talk about it in great detail. So you don't have to spend a lot of time in the interview trying to recall information. So if they tell you, or they ask you a question, the interviewers do, they ask you a question that's like, oh, what was your favorite class at Washtenaw Community College in the nursing program? And you have to sit back and go, let me think about that. You're going to spend a couple of minutes trying to recall something, which I've seen happen in interviews. Again, that showcases a lack of preparedness, a lack of self-awareness to the employers. So, but if you take some time over the next couple of days, or whatever time you have available to you getting prepared for an interview, and think about yourself, maybe go back through old syllabi, go back through old notes. If you have a official job description at your current job or past job that was given to you by human resources when you hired on, hold on to those types of things, because there's some great information included in that you can talk about in the interview. So you may even have to jog your memory a little bit from like notes and syllabi from past classes. So always important things to hold on to. All right. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the different types of interview styles or formats that you may encounter as your job hunting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some differing different interview questions that you can practice for. So on the screen right now, I kind of have these 4 quadrants. These are the most typical types of interview formats that you may encounter, and each are a little different. Each kind of have their own, kind of culture, I guess, for lack of a better term, and you need to be prepared for that. So very common nowadays is phone interviews. So you may be required to complete a phone interview. They could be anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes long, so they're kind of brief in comparison to a face-to-face interview, which we'll talk more about here in a second. And what may happen, let's say in our scenario that we're using right now with St. Joe's, maybe you get a call like today, again, almost noon on Tuesday. Forgot what day it was, Tuesday. And they want to do a phone interview. Now, some companies will say, we want to do a phone interview right now. And so we're like, whoa, suddenly I wasn't prepared, but now I'm on a phone interview. Some will call to, just like any face-to-face or any other type of interview, to schedule an interview for maybe on the phone like the next day. That's usually the professional way of doing things, instead of blindsiding someone and just calling them and say, hey, are you available right now for a phone interview? And that does happen. Or maybe they're contacting you via email, whatever format they like to contact interview candidates through. But always be prepared, because you never know. You may get a call from a company who wants to do a phone interview right now. Now, let's say it's not the most opportune time. Maybe you're just about to walk into class for an exam, and you're kind of concentrating on that. Maybe you're about to go into a doctor's appointment or dentist appointment, something, and so you're just not ready because of life circumstances. And so you can always ask to see if you could reschedule. That you're not available right now because of, I'm about to go into class to take a final. Can we talk at 2 o'clock? And so always suggest that. Some employers will be flexible, some will not. But always kind of be prepared for that scenario where you get called and the next thing you know, you're on an interview. Okay, so that's why being prepped and always being ready for interviews, because you never know when these might pop up. Now with a phone interview, one quick thing is if you're on your cell, which most of us probably are anymore, make sure that if you have a scheduled phone interview, that you're doing it someplace quiet where there's no background distractions that the employer might hear that are distracting. It could be family, it could be dogs, it could be anything. So if you can find a room in your house or your apartment, or maybe you're on campus, you can get a study room someplace, or maybe just in your car where it might be a little quiet, don't have the car on, don't have the radio going, but someplace where there's no distractions for you or the employers. So if you're in your home and maybe you're in your bedroom or in the living room someplace where it's quiet, you have like your resume and have all the documents out in front of you that you can go to if someone asks a specific question on the phone interview. That's the perfect scenario. Don't be doing anything else. I've heard horror stories after horror stories of people, if these are from employers, of interviewees who have been washing dishes or doing laundry or walking their dog where they're on the phone interview, and employers don't like that. They want to see that you're concentrating on the conversation in the interview session, and that's what you're doing. You're not doing anything else on top of the phone interview. Okay, so just a couple quick things about phone interviewing. Now, the next quadrant there, one-on-one. So that's where there's one interviewer, one interviewee. This is the traditional way of doing interviews, but it's kind of being phased out, to be honest with you. They still happen. I don't want to say they don't, but they still happen. But it is being replaced, I guess, for what are called committee or panel interviews, where there's one interviewee, you, the job seeker, and multiple interviewers. 2, 3, 4 interviewers. So that's something to be prepared for as well. Years ago, gosh, it was over 20 years ago now, I was trying to get a position over at the University of Michigan Law School as a student advisor. Walked into the interview, and there were 9 interviewers. And yeah, it was, yes, exactly. So it was my blood turned to ice. It was kind of insane. It was like everyone from their departmental secretary all the way up to an associate VP and faculty members and human resources. And so that's an extreme. Usually it's like 2 to 4 people are going to be on your interview panel. Maybe someone from HR, maybe your supervisor who will be overseeing you if you get hired for this position, maybe a coworker, and maybe someone random, someone from outside the department, just to get a different perspective. And that's what it's all about, differing perspectives. When it's a one-on-one interview, it's just one person's opinion about the candidate. And that can be a less effective way of hiring someone as opposed to a committee or panel interview. Okay. Now, a group interview, as I have on there, is sort of the opposite of a panel. A group interview is where there's one interviewer in front of a whole room of interview candidates. So, I mean, could be up to 20, 25, 30 people all getting interviewed at the same time. And I know some places, I know Kohl's used to do this, the department store, Comcast, well, Xfinity or Comcast, whatever they're called now, used to do this a lot too, especially those companies that do a lot of bulk hiring right around this time of year and earlier in the fall, where companies are gearing up for the holidays and have a lot of need for additional people. They'll do these group interviews, and so you could be one of 15 people sitting in a room someplace, all getting interviewed, all being asked the same questions, just right down the line. And so there'll be one interviewer with multiple interviewees. So again, one of those things that you need to be prepared for. Don't let that throw you off your game as you walk into the room, because you weren't prepared for it. So yeah, that's committee versus or panel versus group interviewing. Now the fourth quadrant there, electronic or Skype or GoToMeeting or any of these different platforms out there that companies may use, especially if it's an interview that's distance. Maybe you're trying to look for work in a different part of the country, maybe Tallahassee, Florida, or Bangor, Maine. And instead of flying out there for an interview, maybe their first initial interview with you will be via Skype or via some other platform. Sometimes it just doesn't have to be out of state. Maybe you're interviewing in Traverse City. Maybe there's that's a 3.5 to 4 hour drive depending on where you're at, and maybe the first interview is electronically. So this is very similar to a phone interview, except they can see you now typically, especially like on Skype or those kind of formats where there's a webcam. So you have to take that in consideration. So at least from the waist up, you need to be dressed professionally. Yeah, so have, just like you would in a face-to-face interview, we're going to talk about dress here in a few moments. You'll have professional dress. Very similar to phone interviews. Don't have any distractants. Don't do this in Starbucks or someplace like that. Don't do it in a dining room where there's people running around behind you. My kids used to love running behind me when I was on Skype, Skype sessions. Even though somehow they got in my office when the door was locked too. But anyway, so that can be off-putting to an employer. So make sure your background is kind of neutral. There's no pictures or posters or anything behind you that could be distracting as well. The other thing is technology. Skype's gotten much better over the years. I used to have so many problems when the platform was still launched or first launched with issues in connectivity. But make sure you have the most current, up-to-date app, so everything is, or if you're using it on your laptop, make sure everything's up to date. You have the right phone number, the right connectivity or connection pin or anything that you need. So the last thing you want to do is 2 minutes before your interview and you're scrambling trying to get connected. That just looks unprofessional. So technology can sometimes be a little bit of a barrier. So make sure well ahead of time of your interview that you have everything in order and ready to go. And so you're not scrambling at the last minute looking for the most updated version, or you can't connect because you don't have the right phone number, what have you. So, or the right access ID or anything of that nature. So again, those are the typical ones that you might face. Now, I also want to point out that there are jobs that require more than one interview. It's not just a one and done type of situation. Sometimes entry-level positions, it's a one interview and then you get hired or you don't. But usually if it's a more advanced position, it doesn't have to be like a senior level position. It could be the next step up from entry level, where you have a first interview and then you have a second interview. Sometimes you have a first interview, second interview, third interview. And so as you get more advanced in your careers and kind of move up the food chain, more and more interviews might be included in the hiring process. So that's something else to be prepared for as well, that there might be multiple interviews. And really, the questions get more difficult as you work your way up the interview ladder. And so, again, preparing for that is also important as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the different types of questions you might be asked during the interview process. And Megan, I'm going to send you a copy of interview questions if you want to pass it along to them. I have a list of like 130 different types of interview questions they can use to practice. So I'll get that to you this afternoon if you want to pass it along to them, okay? So there are sort of two broad categories in terms of interviewing. One, and again, these are very broad, but the first is what we call traditional information seeking questions. And they are really designed to get information from you. Now, the interviewers may already know a little bit about you from a resume, from an application. I've said that a couple times already, but they're probably still going to ask you some information in these types of questions. So things like, tell me about yourself. Where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years or 2 years, whatever it might be? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why did you choose this particular career? So those are the kind of general traditional information seeking questions. Now the other broad category are behavior or situational based questions, and these are becoming more and more common. Actually what we hear with some employers, they're starting to kind of negate using the traditional information seeking questions and go wholly to behavior situational questions. So these are, tell me about a time that something happened and what was the result. These are a little bit more difficult to answer because they could ask you about a wide range of different experiences that you've had, and that's kind of the point. They want to see what different types of experiences you've had in the past. So it could be something like, tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a supervisor or a coworker or a client or customer that you're working with. Tell me about a time that you missed a deadline. Tell me about a time that you were part of a team and there was a particular team member who wasn't carrying his or her weight and how you handled that situation. There are a whole wide range, and I can get you some of these questions as well to kind of practice off of. And they're a little bit more difficult to answer, but there is I guess a couple things to be mindful of in these questions. What I find sometimes is people who are answering these questions in interviews get very specific on details. And sometimes most employers don't really care about the getting into the weeds or too deep about details. So tell me about a time you had a conflict with a supervisor and you respond, well, yeah, it was a Tuesday afternoon at 12:10 and it was cold outside and I just grabbed a Starbucks latte and I was coming in and my boss, Dave, he's a jerk, but blah, blah, blah. And so they're getting into the details way too much. And an employer really prefers like a 10,000-foot overview of what really happened. What was the situation? Explain it briefly. I had a conflict with my supervisor about my scheduling. There was some miscommunication. He or she thought I was supposed to start at noon. I saw it on the schedule that I was starting at 4. It could be something like that. So being not too vague, but being kind of glossing over some of those big details. So what the situation was. Then what did you do? What was the action that you did? So I went and talked to my supervisor about the situation, talked to him or her directly, and we talked a little bit about what the differing pieces of communication about the situation came up. So what was the action item? What did you do? And then what was the response? What happened as a result of this situation? So there should be a growth there. I learned in this situation that I need to take a closer look at my schedule to make sure that I know when I'm supposed to start my shift, blah, blah, blah. So what's the situation? What did you do because of it? And then what was the result? That's kind of a good pattern to follow in answering these questions, because they can be asking you about a whole wealth of different types of scenarios in your past, and it's kind of a way to put you on the spot a little bit, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of go into a little bit of detail about the different types of diverse experiences that you've had in the classroom, or maybe you've had in the workplace or in your personal life that fits this type of scenario. Okay. Now, one quick thing, because they can ask about so many things. You may get asked about a particular scenario that you've never faced before. It happens quite often. Even in mock interviewing, when I'm practicing with students, I'll ask, tell me about a time that you've had a conflict with a supervisor or an instructor and how you handled it. That's a common one I always ask. And I've had students say, I've never had a conflict, which can happen. Most of us don't go out into the world looking to create conflict with people. But so if you're ever faced with a situation where you've never had that experience in your past, don't make something up on the spot. The interviewers will be able to see that. But usually the best method is provide a hypothetical. And what I mean by that is, you can answer, I've never faced that scenario where I've had a conflict with a supervisor or an instructor, but if I did, this is how I would handle it. And that way you can give them how you feel truly and honestly you would handle that situation if you were ever to encounter it in the future. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. Don't try to make something up. They'll be able to see right through it. Now, I guess this is a good time to say, don't ever lie in an interview, or provide false or misinformation, or on your resume, or on an application, or any part of the hiring process. Honesty is always the best policy. I shouldn't say everyone, the majority of employers out there do background check. They do check references. They have all kinds of different methods of running background checks on you. So there'll be, if you falsify information or provide misinformation or you lie straight out, they'll find out about it. So honesty is always the best policy. Okay. Now, come on. There we go. So I do want to talk briefly about dressing for the interview, because that is part of the whole process. You need to dress for success. What I have on the screen right now is just some quick things that could be for either male or female job candidates. You should always dress, excuse me, always dress professionally. That doesn't always mean like a three-piece suit. But if you do have a two-piece business suit or a tie or a sport coat or something like that for male job seekers, always good to use. Some very simple things. Make sure your clothes are clean. That sounds silly, but people who have never been on an interview don't realize that they have to present a good professional figure. So make sure your clothes are clean. Make sure they fit. Maybe you've gained weight. Maybe you've lost weight since the last time you wore your professional dress. So maybe a couple days before you try things on. Don't wait till the morning of the interview at 8:30 and you're trying on your clothes and nothing fits. Make sure everything's clean, wrinkle-free. Dress for the season. So as maybe you're doing interviews in the winter, don't dress in like light linens and don't wear wool in July. Dress appropriately for the season. Make sure everything's coordinated. Everything is well put together. A simple thing is I have on there clean shoes. Now as we start to get into the winter months, there'll be salt, there'll be slop everywhere, and as you kind of walk into the interview site, maybe take a quick moment to clean off your shoes and your pant cuffs, because you maybe picked up some salt on the way in. So it's very simple things like that you can do, and it goes to hygiene as well. You got to get cleaned up. You got to brush your teeth. You got to shower. You got to be cleaned. It may sound silly, but if someone's never been on an interview, they don't realize these types of things. So be well groomed. Maybe get a haircut or get your hair done a couple days ahead of time. It's all these little things that make a big impact on an employer. Okay. Now, some other simple things. Minimize the amount of cologne or perfume or any types of odors, especially in our scenario where we're using healthcare, wanting to work in healthcare. That's something definitely that you want to avoid, something with a lot of odors. Plus, the people that you're interviewing with might have allergies or be sensitive. Whoops, sorry about that. That's my phone or my watch. So minimize those kind of things. Jewelry as well. Keep your pockets empty. Don't, this may sound silly, but I was on a professional interview panel where a candidate came in and was chewing gum through the entire interview. It drove us crazy. And she was a really good candidate too. But anyways, so no gum, candy, don't have anything in your mouth. And also, you may want to invest in a pad folio or a portfolio you can take with you, something that is like a leather or a fake leather binder that has a legal pad in it that you can put pens in, that you can make notes on, and even keep copies of any type of documents like a resume or letters of recommendation that you want to share with the interviewer. So you may want to invest in that. You can get them fairly cheap or inexpensively at places like Staples and even Target and Walmart, places like that. So that may be a good investment to get into. So now, real quick, this is for male job seekers, so kind of a before and after. You can kind of see. We want you to look more like the right side of the screen, not the left side. So as you can see, gentlemen in the audience, if you don't know how to tie a tie, learn. It's becoming kind of a lost art in a lot of places where business casual is kind of taking over as a dress code. But in an interview, I would always suggest wearing a tie if possible. I know not everyone has a lot of finances to buy a new wardrobe, but it again is something very simple to purchase. But know how to tie a tie. There's videos on YouTube. There's howtotieatie.com that you can go and visit to learn how to tie a tie. So as you can see on the right side, very conservative dress, dark colors. You can see kind of, I know it's hard to see on the screen, but he is holding a padfolio. Again, one of those things that is important to take with you. He's shaved, he's put together, so he looks much more professional than the left side where he's got sandals and he's all wrinkly and has that wrinkled up resume, which actually we see quite often. Now, for female job seekers, one thing I like to point out, on the left side, she is comparison to the guy on the last slide, but she looks very nice, but it's just way too casual. That wouldn't work in an interview setting. So you want to look more like the right size again, darker colors, so navies, blacks, charcoals, dark browns. You can put a splash of color, maybe a neckerchief or like a pocket square for guys in their or their tie can be a little bit, have some colors, but again, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't have something that's all like bright yellow, bright orange. And one thing I know that employers don't like is like big bags, purses, backpacks, anything like that dragged into the interview. You don't need to bring those in. I also suggest maybe turning your cell phone off completely, not just put on vibration mode, because mine during this entire session has been vibrating like crazy as I get emails and texts. So and my phone or my watch just went off a moment ago. So I mean, those things can be very distracting. If you're getting calls and texts and it's going off and it's beeping, or you have a chime or something, I mean, that can be very distracting to the whole process. So turn your phone off. It's only going to be 45 minutes or so, and you'll be able to follow up with any calls or texts afterwards. So as you can see, she looks very nice on the left-hand side, but again, the point of this is that she's just too casual. Too much jewelry, too bright colors. Want to be more like the right-hand side of the screen, and again, cutting that professional figure. It's part of the process. When you meet with an employer and you're in the lobby and you walk in and you shake the hand of the interviewer for the first time, they're going to be sizing you up. And one thing that they're going to be looking at is your professional dress. Okay, so it's something you need to take some time, have everything together the night before. Don't be running around the morning of looking for shoes or a belt or something like that. So get this all together the night before your interview. All right. Now, real quick, there are some things to be mindful of as far as your behavior during the interview. I call it interview etiquette. Interview is a professional communication situation. It is not like talking with your parents or a loved one or your friends. It's where it can be more casual. This is a very kind of structured professional setting. And so basically, I like to use kind of jokingly, everything that they taught you in grade school, you need to practice during the interview. Sit up straight, don't fidget. I have a tendency to talk a lot with my hands, try to keep that under control. Don't lean way back in your chair, don't get that relaxed. It also looks like body language, you're trying to avoid the conversation. But sort of lean forward a little bit so you're part of the active conversation. Practice good eye contact. That's something that's hard for a lot of people, and myself included. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I still have problems maintaining good eye contact. But it shouldn't be something where you're staring at the person or leering at the person. It's something you can look down or up away every now and then, but we don't want somebody who's staring directly at the floor of the entire conversation. So, there are these things that you need to be aware of. Shaking hands, very strong, is a good bonding moment when you meet the employer. And of course, as I have there at the end, turn off all electronic devices, including your pager, if you still have a pager. All right. All right. Now, after the interview, there's some quick things that you have to do when the interview ends. make sure you get a business card from everyone who was on the interview panel. This will be important here in a second. Thank everyone for the time, shake everyone's hands, and then ask for a business card. And that'll come up again here in a moment. Find out what the next steps are. As I mentioned earlier, is there going to be a second interview? When's the hiring date? Always good to find out that information as well. As you leave, maybe stop in the lobby or in your car and kind of sit down and write out the questions that they asked you. Were there any questions that you particularly had some struggles with? Write down your answers and note, I could have done better on this question, or I think I nailed this question. So write down the answers and the questions and the answers as much as you can remember. Don't wait for 2 days later, because then you won't remember what the questions were. Now, within 24 hours, send a thank you. It could be an email, or it could be a hard copy letter. It's up to you. I know, talking with employers, they find like a hard copy mailed thank you letter, or one that was dropped off to them, that much more impactful. So you may want to go to like Dollar General or someplace like that. You don't have to spend a ton of money on thank you cards. Just something that's blank that you can write, Dear Mr. Smith, thank you for having me in to interview for the nursing position. Hope to hear from you soon. Sincerely, cordially, respectfully, Dave. Something very simple like that. So there is something tangible about the hard copy thank you note or thank you letter, thank you card that you send. It sits on someone's desk for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. I have several on my desk right now from students I've assisted. And I look at it like, oh yeah, I remember. It's kind of a reminder of that particular person. Send an email. It's quick, it's easy, but it's also easy to delete and also easy to forget. But it's up to you. You could write, but real quick, within 24 hours, get those thank yous out to everyone who was on the interview panel. All right. So any questions in the last few minutes that we have available? Just type them up in the chat box there. No, okay. Okay. And you're welcome. All right, thank you. Okay. All right, whoop, thank you very much. And you're all welcome. So, but if you do need any help, my office, Career Service, is located on campus in the Student Center building. We recently moved a couple months ago now. We're located on the first floor, room 112. If you do need any help at all with job hunting, resume reviews, interview, if you need further interview prep, keep us in mind. We'd be more than happy to help you out. And you can find us on WCC's website, but our location again is in SC, first floor, Student Center building, room 112, kind of kitty corner from the subway. But otherwise, I want to thank you so much for having me in and talk today. Hopefully it was some good information. I know it was a lot of information. But if you need further help, let us know. We're here to help out. Okay? Thank you, everyone. All righty. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays.
And thank you for having me in. Are you going to be teaching next week?
I am.
Okay,
yep.
cool.
I'll email you. Absolutely.
All right, we appreciate that. Thank
All
you.
right, everybody. Thanks to Dave for coming in. Lots of great information about interviewing. So hopefully you'll be able to utilize some of those skills that you've learned. Let's quickly go over everything that is due. So as far as this meeting, you've got that covered. But if you're watching the video, the alternate assignment is due tomorrow by 11:59 p.m. For everyone else, unit number 6, module 4, part number 2 is due, which is the mock interview activity, the mock interview assignment, and the mock interview critique. Also, the time management planning for unit number 7. By this coming Sunday, unit number 7, module 1 is due, which is your lifelong learning video quiz. Putting together your reflective portfolio video, and then completing your reflective portfolio quiz, and completing journal number 7. So this is a pretty big week. You have a lot of assignments that take a little bit more time. So make sure you're trying to manage your time appropriately to get through these assignments. Hang in there. I know there's a lot to do, but we're getting toward the end. Basically, if you've kept up with all of the assignments, your reflective portfolio is going to be a combination of everything that you've completed throughout the semester that you'll be able to put together in a portfolio for that assignment. So keep on that, look ahead, and of course, let me know if you have any questions. At this point, I know we're running out of time. Do you have any questions that you have specifically for me right now? You can type them into the chat box. If no, send me a quick N and we will be off. Good. Got some no's. Anyone else? Great. Okay, well, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week and have a great weekend. I will be out of town this weekend, but I will have my computer and we'll check emails and assignments when I can. So just let me know if you need anything. And thanks so much for joining us today, and I will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.